Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We are in 1 Samuel chapter 4. And we could probably call this the rise of the prophet. Now, this is not the first time, of course, prophets have come on the scene. There have always been prophets. Moses was a prophet, of course. But I mean, even during the time of the judges, but there was not a lot of emphasis on them. So, for example, remember we talked about the calling of Eli. Well, remember in the previous chapter there was a man of God. Okay, so he prophesied to Eli. So the point is that there have always been those whom God has called who would speak his word, the prophecies, okay? And so Samuel now becomes not the first prophet. Again, I want to kind of emphasize that. But we're going to see more of an emphasis on the office of the prophet as they are in relationship with the office of the king. Now, what's also interesting about it that if you wanted to kind of go back and do a background history, and if you want to go back and all right, I lost my thought here. If you want to do a history as it relates to our country, the freedom of religion. Now, what's interesting about this, there's always been, for centuries, this back and forth fighting, argument, debates over who has the greater authority, the king or the religious leader, or in this case, a prophet, or in recent times, the Pope. Okay, that back and forth, the bitter back and forth, the hypocritical back and forth, the abuse of these offices is what led to America's freedom of religion. Now, the freedom of religion wasn't separation of church and state, as some have tried to argue. But it was getting away from the abuses of both the king and the religious leaders. That's why we have freedom of press, freedom of religion, all those things, because you don't have these different people regulating it. Okay. As we saw, Samuel, God had called Samuel as a little boy as a prophet. I want to go back to chapter 3 to kind of show you, because the verse 1 kind of is placed, I think, in the wrong place. Chapters and chapters, headings and verses are not inspired, and oftentimes they bundle it, and this is one of those cases. So I'm going to go back and show you why this statement is made in chapter 4. And basically, it is the rise of Samuel as a prophet / judge of Israel. All right. All right. I'm just going to read verse 19. And it says, Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and he fulfilled everything Samuel prophesied. Now, this would be the destruction of Eli. We're going to see this in the next chapter. And then it says, all Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, knew that Samuel was a confirmed prophet of the Lord. The Lord continued to appear in Shiloh because there he revealed himself to Samuel by word. Now, in chapter 4, he says, and Samuel's word came to all of Israel. That's why I wanted to go back in chapter 3. Samuel's word came to all of Israel. Now, remember, God had confirmed Samuel as a prophet. This is why you could trust and rely and follow Samuel. Unlike these so-called false prophets today, but I digress. I spent a lot of time on that in the last study. They, why these people who claim that they are prophets and they want you to follow their words. They're not confirmed. God hasn't confirmed them as prophets. But anyway, I do digress. It says, Israel went out to meet the Philistines in battle and camped at Ebenezer, while the Philistines camped at Aphex. The Philistines lined up in battle formation against Israel, and as the battle intensified, Israel was defeated by the Philistines, who struck down about 4,000 men in the battlefield. Remember, God prophesied this. A lot of wickedness during this time. And it says God is judging. He's using the Philistines to judge Israel. Verse 3, when the troops returned to the camp, the elders of Israel asked, why did the Lord let us be defeated today by the Philistines? Let's bring the ark of the Lord's covenant from Shiloh. Then it will go for us. It will go with us and save us from the hand of our enemies. Now, this is foolish on their part. Again, remember when we hear these statements, just as we saw in Israel, in the book of Judges, how some of this stuff is crazy. Like, for example, when the one guy hired a priest to be priest over him, and then he thought, oh my God, and he had all these idol gods. Okay, so remember during this time, and this is kind of like this is like the last generations of the period of the judges, which means all of this wickedness was just all of this wickedness was just terrible. So they thought, let's bring the ark, not seek God. Okay, in other words, let's not seek God for his advice. So let's bring the ark. Now, this is also going to tell us that if you are old like I am, you remember the movie Indiana Jones, where they found the ark of the Lord, and you see this power come out. Well, notice this statement right here. I can't help but they get it from this statement where there was this belief that the power in itself was in the ark and not the Lord, which was foolish. Verse 4. So the people sent me to Shiloh to bring back the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, who dwells between the cherubims. Eli's two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant of God. That's a bad sign there, because remember how wicked these two were. Verse 5, and when the ark of the covenant of the Lord entered the camp, all the Israelites raised such a loud shout that the ground shook. Then the Philistines heard the sound of the war cry and asked, what's this loud shout in the Hebrews' camp? And when the Philistines discovered that the ark of the Lord had entered the camp, they panicked. The gods have entered their camp, they said. Woe to us. Nothing like this has happened before. Woe to us. Who will rescue us from the hand of these magnificent gods? Now, remember, Israel, the Hebrew God, Israel, Yahweh, had a reputation in the world. What he did to Egypt, what he did to all of the countries around them. So they knew this. It said, these are the gods that slaughtered the Egyptians with all kinds of plagues in the wilderness. Show some courage and be men, Philistines. Otherwise you will serve the Hebrew just as they have served you. Now be men and fight. So the Philistines fought, and Israel was defeated, and each man fled to his tent. And the slaughter was severe. 30,000 of the Israelite foot soldiers fell. And the ark of God was captured, and Eli's two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, died. That same day, there was the Benjamite who ran. Now remember, that was prophesied that Hophni and Phinehas would die on the same day. Verse 12, the same day a Benjamite man ran from the battle and came to Shiloh. His clothes were torn, and there was dirt on his head. And when he arrived, there was Eli sitting on his chair beside the road watching, because he was anxious about the ark of God. And when the men entered the city to give a report, the entire city cried out. Eli heard the outcry and asked, what is this commotion? And the men quickly came and reported to Eli the same. And at that time Eli was 98 years old, and his gaze was fixed because he couldn't see. And the man said to Eli, I'm the one who came from the battle. I fled from there today. What happened, my son? Eli asked. The messenger answered, Israel has fled from the Philistines, and also there was a great slaughter among the people. Your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are both dead, and the ark of God had been captured. And when he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell backwards off his chair by the city gate, and since he was old and heavy, his neck broke and he died. Eli had judged Israel 40 years. Kind of interesting that Eli here is labeled as a judge. Okay. Eli's daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, was pregnant and about to give birth, and when she heard the news about the capture of God's ark and the deaths of her father-in-law and her husband, she collapsed and gave birth because her labor pains came on her. And as she was dying, the woman taking care of her said, Don't be afraid, you have given birth to a son. But she did not respond or pay attention. And she named the boy Ichabod, saying, The glory has departed from Israel, referring to the capture of the ark of God and to the death of her father-in-law and her husbands. The glory is departed from Israel, she said, because the ark of God had been captured. Kind of interesting, kind of sad, right? Because if you think about this, Eli didn't care about his sons, right? He's like, oh my God, the ark is caught. The ark is captured. And that's what caused him to lose balance and fall and break his neck. So he named this baby Ichabod. Now think about that name, growing up with that kind of name. Hey, Ichabod, what does that mean? The glory has departed. All right, chapter 5. It says, After the Philistines have captured the ark of God, they took it from Ebenezer to Ashdod, brought it into the temple of Dagon, and placed it next to his statue. When the people of Ashdod got up early the next morning, there was Dagon fallen with his face into the ground before the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and returned him to his place. When they got up early the next morning, there was Dagon fallen with his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. This time, both Dagon's head and the palms of his hands were broken off, lying on the threshold. Only Dagon's torso remained. That is why, to this day, the priests of Dagon and everyone who enters the temple of Dagon and Ashdod do not step on Dagon's threshold. Now, kind of interesting how this story unfolds. Israel. So the Philistines capture then the ark of God, and then God is going to do this work among the pagans. Now watch this, because it's just fascinating here. Verse 6. The Lord's hand was heavy on the people of Ashdod, terrorizing and afflicting the people of Ashdod and its territories with tumors. When the men of Ashdod saw what was happening, they said, The ark of Israel's God must not stay here with us, because his hand is strongly against us and our God Dagon. Now you would think they would surrender to Dagon. They would surrender to God and forsake Dagon. But notice they don't. The sinfulness of man. Remember, I said as we move through the Bible, the one thing we see repeatedly more than anything else is the incredible sinfulness of man. Verse 8. So they call on the Philistine rulers and ask, What should we do with the ark of the ark of Israel's God? The ark of Israel's God should be moved to Gath, they replied. So the men of Ashdod moved the ark, and after they had moved it, the hand of the Lord was against the city of Gath, causing great panic. He afflicted the men of the city, from the youngest to the oldest, with outbreak of tumors. And the Gittites then sent the ark of God, the Gittites, sent the ark of God to Ekron. But when they got there, the Ekronites cried out. They moved the ark of God to kill us. They moved the ark of Israel's God to kill us and our people. The Ekronites called on the Philistine rulers together, and they said, Send the ark of Israel away. It must be returned to its place, so it won't kill us or our people. For they fear the fear of death pervaded the city. God's hand was oppressing them, and the men who did not die were afflicted with tumors, and the outcry of the city went up into heaven. Now this is amazing. Let me go to chapter 6. Because this, again, you would think this would be a sign that the true and living God lives, and for them to forsake their idolatry, but they don't. Verse 1, chapter 6, verse 1. When the ark of the Lord had been in the land of Philistine for 7 months, the Philistines summoned the priests and diviners and pleaded, "What should we do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us how we can send it back to its place." They replied, "If you send the ark of Israel of God away, you must not send it without an offering. You must send it back. You must send back a restitution offering to him, and you will be healed." Then the reason his hand hasn't been removed from you will be revealed. They asked, "What restitution offerings should we send back?" Now notice who they're asking. They're asking the wrong people. They're not asking the priests of the Lord. They're kind of coming up with this and kind of making up this solution. It says, "And they answered, 5 golden tumors and 5 gold mice, corresponding to the number of the Philistine rulers. Since there was one plague for both you and your rulers, make images of your tumors and of your mice that are destroying the land. Give glory to Israel's gods. Perhaps he will stop oppressing you, your God, and your land. Why harden your hearts as the Egyptians and the Pharaoh hardened theirs? When he afflicted them, didn't they send Israel away, and Israel left?" Interesting, this knowledge they have, this history, which remember is over 400 years old, close to 500 years. What is even further interesting is that they're not recognizing the true God. Remember, none of these signs and wonders are being wrought by Dagon, their God. So this is, again, just kind of amazing. But notice that they recognize, hey, let's bow to this guy. In other words, we're not going to serve him, but we're certainly not going to harden our hearts and keep the ark. Look what happened to Egypt and Pharaoh. Verse 7. "Now then, prepare 1 new cart and 2 milk cows that have never been yoked. Hitch a cow to the cart, but take their calves away and pin them up. Take the ark of the Lord, place it on carts, and put the gold objects that you're sending on him as the restitution offering in a box besides the ark. Send it off and let it go its way. Then watch. If it goes up on the road to its homeland towards Beth Shemesh, it is the Lord who has made this terrible trouble for us. However, if it doesn't, we will know that it was just his hand. It was not his hand that punished us. It was just something that happened to us by chance." The men did this. They took the 2 milk cows, hitched them to the cart, and confined their calves in the pen. They put the ark of the Lord on the carts, along with the box containing the gold mice and the images of the tumors. Now, at least they would have some gold they could melt down and use. Verse 12. "The cow went straight up to the road of Beth Shemesh and stayed on that one highway, lowering as it went. They never strayed to the right or to the left. The Philistine rulers were walking behind them to the territory of Beth Shemesh. And the people of Beth Shemesh were harvesting wheat in the valley, and when they looked up, they saw the ark, and they were overjoyed to see it. The cart came to the field of Joshua of Beth Shemesh and stopped there near the large rock. The people of this city chopped up the cart and offered the cows as the burnt offerings to the Lord. The Levites removed the ark of the Lord along with the box containing the gold objects placed on them on the large rock. That day the men of Beth Shemesh offered burnt offerings and made sacrifice to the Lord. And when the five Philistine rulers observed this, they returned to Ekron the same day. As a restitution offering to the Lord, the Philistines had sent back 1 gold tumor for each city. As a restitution offering to the Lord, the Philistines had sent back 1 gold tumor for each city: Ashdod, Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron. On the number of gold mites also corresponding to the number of the Philistine cities of 5 rulers, the fortified cities, and the outlying villages. The large rock on which the ark of the Lord was placed in the field of Joshua of Bethshemesh to this day. And God struck down the men of Bethshemesh because they looked inside the ark. He struck down 70 men out of 50,000 men. And people mourned because the Lord struck them with a great slaughter. And the men of Bethshemesh asked, "Who is able to stand in the presence of the holy Lord God? Who should the ark go to from there?" They sent messengers to Karajima, saying, "The Philistines have returned the ark of the Lord. Come down and get it." Now, kind of interesting. Remember that the people were plagued by the Lord because the Philistines were plagued by the Lord because they kept the ark. And then when the people opened the chest, and the ark was like a chest, when they opened it, they got struck down. And of course, Israel should have known better than to do that, right? Israel should have known better. And so they tried to be funny, but God struck them down. All right, we'll pick it up in chapter 7 in the next study. I'll see you then. All right.